Good evening. Thank you for joining us tonight, and welcome to Viterbo University. First, again, one more round of applause for the wonderful concert choir for the piece of music. This is going to be a very special evening. We are in our 11th year of the D.B. Reinhardt Institute for Ethics and Leadership here at Viterbo, and over these years we have had a distinguished array of speakers, programs, publications, and research, and this has all been made possible through this institute. A special component of these programs, of course, is the opportunity for our university and the local community to welcome Holocaust survivors to La Crosse and learn from them. Such will be the case tonight when we get to hear from Eva Schloss. Eva is making her second visit to Viterbo University, the first being in 2015, and I know many of you had the opportunity to hear from her then. If this is your first time hearing from her, you're in for a very special presentation, as we are, even if it's our second time. You'll also hear about a play being held at the Weber Center in downtown La Crosse called Then They Came for Me, remembering the world of Anne Frank. And after that play, there'll be an opportunity for a question and answer with Eva, and that's held the next two nights at the Weber Center, and I understand there's still tickets available. There is also an exhibit in the lobby, and that's outlined in your program, on the paintings created in hiding, with Eva's father and brother had paintings that were hidden, and we'll hear more about that. So if you didn't get the opportunity to look at those on the way in, I encourage you to do so on the way out. This decade of programming at Viterbo through the Ethics Institute would not be possible without our generous benefactors, some of whom are in the audience today, who provide the initial and continued support for the D.B. Reinhardt Institute for Ethics and Leadership. This institute is a gift not only to our students here, but all of Viterbo and the entire La Crosse community. I had the opportunity to learn we have people visiting from Chicago, from Austin, Texas, from all over the Midwest here with us tonight. And it's just such a wonderful opportunity for all of us, and especially for Viterbo to host this night. We especially thank the Reinhardt Center for endowing this institute and for all of the benefactors who make these events possible. I also wish to acknowledge and thank all of the Ethics Institute who planned such a wonderful series of events, and the Fine Arts Center staff for all that they do for these performances. Of course, from the Ethics Institute staff, I have to do a special recognition for Daryl Klott. Daryl Klott and her dedication to Holocaust education is the reason we're here tonight. So please join me in thanking and welcoming Daryl Klott to the stage for the introduction of Eva Schloss.
Good evening. I am Daryl Klott, and I have the very best job on the face of the earth. I am a teacher, and I'm proud to say that I'm a Holocaust educator. Before I begin, I want to tell you that WKBT will broadcast tonight's presentation on October 8th at 11:05 p.m. So you can set your recorders and watch it again if you want to, or you can tell people that weren't able to come tonight that they can catch it. And again, that is on October 8th, WKBT at 11:05 p.m. As you can see in your program, we have a wonderful exhibit of 30 paintings done by Eva Schloss's beloved father and brother. They are copies of the originals. They were painted when Pappy and Heinz were in hiding. The majority were done by her brother, Heinz, 20 of them, and 10 of them were done by her father. Heinz had never had an art lesson. And when I look at those, I think, what on earth he could have done with all that talent if he had been allowed to live. We are very fortunate to be here tonight, for we are about to touch history. This year marks 12 years that Viterbo University has been involved in Holocaust education. First, through our Holocaust educator workshops, and our 12th one will be held March 22nd and 23rd, 2018. The other component of our Holocaust education program is bringing Holocaust speakers, mainly survivors, to Viterbo to speak to our community. I am proud to say that Eva will be our 18th Holocaust speaker in 12 years, and 15 of them have been survivors. People often ask me how we end up choosing our survivors. to come to Viterbo, and I love a good story. So I'm going to share with you how it came to be that Eva is with us tonight, all the way from London. In January of 2014, I co-directed the play that Glenna mentioned. Then They Came for Me, Remembering the World of Anne Frank, for the Appleseed Community Theater in La Crescent. I didn't want to do it because I'm not a real director, but they wanted my historical information. I did call myself the hysterical historical director. And they got a wonderful co-director for me, Chrissy Moulton, who actually knew what she was doing. We made quite a team, and it turned out to be one of the most significant experiences of my entire life. The play was about Anne Frank and two teenagers who lived in the same neighborhood as the Franks in Amsterdam, and they were friends. Shortly, you're going to meet one of them, Eva Geiringer Schlasch. I managed to locate Eva at her home in London, and for 6 weeks during rehearsals, I would call her and ask her pertinent questions, and I would come back to the cast with the information. Then my husband, Marv, my partner in Holocaust education, suggested that we ask Eva to come to Viterbo. I called her, and I asked her to come March 26, 2015. And she said to me, "Daryl, isn't there snow in Wisconsin in March?" And I replied, "Sometimes." It took me 5 months of gentle persuasion and a trip that Marv and I made to Florida to meet her when she was speaking there, and then she finally accepted our invitation. Her visit to La Crosse and Viterbo, along with the road trip that Marv and I took her on to speak to several other Wisconsin universities, turned out to be a happening that people are still talking about. Fast forward. A year ago, in May, Marv and I and friends were in Ireland, and I found out that from her ahead of time that she was going to be in Dublin the same time we were, because she was going to do the Irish version of the Late Night Show. So we made a plan to go to dinner together. And during dinner, I looked at her and I said, "Eva, I want you to come back to Viterbo and speak to our community." And she said, "I would be delighted." So here we are tonight. I'm glad you like that story. Incidentally, remember the play I told you that I co-directed? And there's good news. As Glenna mentioned, La Crosse Community Theater is in honor of Eva. They're performing that play. And they have 2 performances, as she mentioned, still coming up, and you can still get tickets. The shows are 7:30 tomorrow night and Wednesday night. She will be in the audience, and she will do a Q&A after each of the performances. We saw the show last night with Eva, and it is powerful and it is not to be missed. A huge thank you to the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration and their prayer partners, who on August 1st started their 140th year of praying around the clock for prayer requests that come in from all over the world. They have been praying that Eva would remain healthy so she could be with us tonight. Our speakers are always a little bit surprised when they find out that it's the prayers that have been keeping them healthy and not their doctors. I have been blessed to study with some of the most brilliant Holocaust scholars in the world, and they fill our heads with important facts. But survivors fill our hearts. They teach us much more about history than any text can. They're living documents. Eva Schlasch is a remarkable human being. Since 1986, she's traveled the world devoting her life to Holocaust education and helping other people understand that we can overcome the most difficult circumstances. And now, prepare to fall in love. It is my privilege to introduce my dear friend, Eva Schlasch.
Well done, Dad.
I love you.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
There you go. Wow.
Wow, yes. Thank you very, very much for this wonderful welcome. And what a beautiful beginning with this lovely choir with about love. We all love. That is really our motto for the next 50 years, all right? Love is the most important thing, not hate.
I have the opportunity of asking questions of Eva. And I want to begin with, how on earth was Hitler able to come to power and do what he did?
That's actually a very, very important question. And this is where, when I speak to schools, younger children, I don't explain this because it's too difficult. But for adults and students, it's very, very important to go back really to the end of the First World War. You can't just start in the middle of some horrible thing, because it had a beginning. And this was really a terrible mistake of the Allied who won the First World War, and they put some terrible, terrible conditions onto Germany. Germany had many restrictions which they were not allowed to do. They lost part of the country, but as well they had to pay an enormous amount of reparation money which they just didn't have. After a war, a country becomes very poor, so how suddenly should they be able to pay billions of marks to other countries? So Germany became really, really unbelievable poor. There was no food, children didn't get shoes, they walked barefoot, there was no work. It was really a dreadful, dreadful situation. It wasn't only Germany, it was Austria. That's where our family came from. And my mother told me the story. She was 15 years old at the end of the First World War, and they had a pet bird, I don't know what kind, but a biggish bird in a cage. And one day, the bird had disappeared, and my mother sat down for supper, and she started to eat, and she said, "Where is Fritzli?" And my grandparent, her mother said, "You're eating it." So, and my mother said, with tears in her eyes, she just carried on eating her little pet bird. So there was really a desperate situation. And the inflation was that bad, that 1,000,000 marks was $1. So, they couldn't buy anything for abroad, and they didn't have anything in the country itself. And the governments in the new republic started to try to put things in order and better, but nobody succeeded. There were about 5-6 governments which failed. And then there came a man and said, "I have a solution, I can put things right." Well, he was a nobody. His name was Adolf Hitler. He was Austrian. He had been fighting in the First World War. He too had suffered the degradation of losing the war. And that was an amazing thing. He had some ideas, and he was the first one who started to build the motorways, the autobahns, as well the Beetle, the Volkswagen car for the people, we all know that. He said, you will all have a car, and somehow people were able to buy cars, and there was work suddenly. He had all kinds of schemes, and even Jewish people joined this Nazi party. But what was as well the case was, after the First World War, Russia had the Russian Revolution, communism became big, and if there's poverty, of course, there is as well, there was a lot of communism in Germany. And the Nazi party started to fight those communists, and there were street fights, there were shootings in the street, and the Allies, realizing what was going on, were more afraid, and this is very, very important, and that is what is happening now as well, actually. They were more afraid of communism than of the Nazis. And they said, let Hitler come to power, and he will fight the Nazis. So they actually supported him. And that was really the mistake. The only one who realized how dangerous this man was going to be was Churchill. He was laughed out in Parliament, and so he had nothing to say. But this is really how Hitler started to succeed. And then when he started with his hate of Jewish people, Not everybody agreed, but the Germans became cowards, they were bystanders. And that is again something which we must not do when we see injustices being done. We must take part in what is going on around us and speak up when we see things are going wrong. So that is a little introduction, and you will see now in part of my story what this man was able to do with, I wouldn't say with the approval of Germany, but with the silence of Germany.
Thank you so much.
And the whole world.
Yes. You had a happy family life in Vienna with your mother, father, brother, and then you were forced to move, first of all to Brussels and then on to Amsterdam. Could you walk us through that, please?
Well, in March 1938, suddenly, without a warning, Hitler marched into Austria with his army. And the Austrian, we were a Jewish family there, a very happy Jewish family. We were not very religious. We mixed with Jews, with Christians. We didn't ask. Nobody asked us who we were. And we were very happy. But the minute the Nazis marched in, the Austrians became a terrible, worse even than in Germany, Nazis. And they stood in the streets with the Heil Hitler salute and with swastika flags. Don't know where suddenly everybody had swastika flags. And Jewish people immediately were attacked, were dragged out of their home, were beaten up. From one day to the next. My brother, who was 12 years old, he came home, he was badly beaten up, blood was streaming from his head and his nose. And when my parents questioned him what has happened, he said, my own friends did that, and the teachers just looked on and let it happen. So you can imagine that many people decided they must leave immediately. At that time, the first couple of days, it wasn't organized yet. One could do that still. But after a few weeks, the Nazis got organized. You couldn't leave without a visa to leave the country. And as well, and this was the tragedy of the Holocaust, by 1938-39, most countries in the world, including America, Canada, Australia, England, didn't want any more Jewish refugees. And Hitler realized the world doesn't care about Jews, and to get rid of them, the only way was to kill them. And this is what slowly the machinery of this terrible killing started to get organized.
And your family settled in Amsterdam in the same neighborhood as the Otto Frank family.
Yes. If ever you go to Amsterdam, go and look. Amsterdam Zuid, Amsterdam South, a kind of relatively new area because Amsterdam was growing, and so there were some empty apartments. And when we settled there late in 1940, we moved to this Merwedeplein, and small apartments, very modern, central heating, double glazing, but very, very small. And and there were no yards, so the children after school came out to this big open space to play. And one day, a little girl came to me, asked me, she realized there was a new child there, where I came from, and I said, from Austria. And she said, oh, her family comes from Germany. She didn't speak German, only Dutch. But she said, my father can speak German to you. She took me up to her apartment, and you met her family, her older sister, and her mother and her father. And Otto Frank spoke German with me, and I took quite a liking to him. I'd lost my grandfather, and he was an older man. My father was not quite 40, and Otto was already in the 50s, so that was sort of a grandfather figure for me. And never suspecting what might happen later. And Anne Frank, of course, at that time was not known. She wasn't yet the little girl who wrote a diary in the war, but nevertheless, she was quite advanced, much more advanced than I was. She was full of stories. She always wanted to be the center of attention. In the school, she was called Mrs. Quack Quack because she never could stop talking. Very often she had to stay behind, and write 100 lines. She's not going to talk so much in class, but she just couldn't help it. She was full of life and full of stories. When she heard I had an older brother, her eyes became very big, and she said, when can I come and meet him? Because at that time, with 11, 12 years old, she had already many boyfriends. I was not interested in boys. I had my brother, and many of his friends came in, so they were just, you know, like family. And we were very happy in Holland. And the Dutch were very, actually they were the only people who really welcomed us. The children all wanted to be best friends, wanted to know how it lived. Holland is very, very flat. They wanted to know how they couldn't imagine what mountains are. You can climb mountains. They were very intrigued with that. So I started to feel better again. I got a bicycle. Everybody had a bicycle. And we settled down to live in a different country. But it didn't last very long because in May 1940, the Germans invaded Holland. And it was a very short war, just 5 days. And that was the first time in this war that a civilian city had been bombed, Rotterdam. And with 10,000 casualties, and within 5 days the Dutch gave up. We still tried to escape to England on a boat, but the last boat had gone. So we went back to the apartment, and, well, we were waiting what was going to happen.
And then you were forced to go into hiding. Could you talk a little bit about that experience, please?
Well, after the Nazis came in, slowly the measures against the Jewish population came, which was at first more of a nuisance. We were not allowed to go out in the morning, early or late at evening, 8 o'clock, and we were not allowed to have a bicycle. We were not allowed to go on public transport, not to cinemas or theaters, which, you know, it was a shame, but it was not life-threatening. Then it started, we had to wear a yellow star, meaning that we were recognizable walking in the street. And that was then becoming more and more dangerous, because they rounded up people who wore the star, especially Jewish men and boys, and they disappeared, and we never heard of them again. Only after the war did we hear they were sent to Mauthausen, which was an Austrian death camp with stone quarries, and they were just thrown down from the cliffs. But luckily we didn't know this at that time. But then we